So welcome to everyone, and especially to my co-panelists. My name is Becca Nagorsky, and I'm HDR's Global Lead for Transit Planning Practice, and I'll be serving a hybrid role in this session, so providing a short introductory presentation on the topic, and then shifting to a moderator role, and welcoming the rest of our panelists. So starting out, in 2023, I served as the planner in residence at the University of Waterloo. In their planning program, they do a planning practice course every year. And I centered the course around wicked problems in transportation planning. And one of those weeks was the wicked problem of transit investment-induced gentrification. And it was easily the most popular dilemma. The students really resonated. Many of them wrote their final papers on the topic and did some really interesting research and thinking. So when I saw that Mpact was pulling together a session on the topic, I was immediately drawn to submit, and I proposed an intro to the session that does kind of a level set on the topic. What I found when I prepped for my class was that a topic that you think kind of everyone sort of understands, when you dig into it, you realize that in the research and the thinking, there's a lot more nuance and more questions than answers. And so I think it's a good way to set the stage for the presentations and definitely for the discussion. So launching in, and can I get back the presentation? Okay, excellent. I wanted to start with the origins of the term gentrification. It was coined by Ruth Glass in 1964 to describe a phenomenon that she was observing in London, and where she was seeing neighborhood change take place. And her emphasis was really, as you can see in the quote, on class, zeroing in on displacement of people and changing character. And flipping ahead to today, a more contemporary definition really emphasizes economic change in historically disinvested neighborhoods where higher income residents move in, and there's demographic change, not necessarily the class-based demographic change that Ruth Glass observed, but more in terms of educational attainment and race. And then in digging into the research, and especially some of the really recent kind of questions on really characterizing and understanding what gentrification is, I thought the picture got a lot more interesting in terms of what we're measuring when we talk about gentrification. In some ways, I think we've all recognized a neighborhood that looks gentrified, but what do we really mean by that? And so what I learned is that researchers are very good at measuring changes to places. So we're very good at looking at the average income or rents in a neighborhood or an area and understanding if they've changed, if they've gone up or down. But we have a much harder time measuring changes to people. And so what this means is that when we see average income go up in a neighborhood where, let's say, a new rail line has just been built, we don't always know if the reason that happened was because people were displaced, existing residents were forced to move out, and new residents moved in, or whether the effect is something that I think we all hope happens when we build new transit, which is that residents have access to better jobs, and so income goes up because the same people are better off. And that's, literally often a case that we make when we are advocating for new transit. So given those confounding factors that I mentioned, I challenged myself to really describe when we talk about gentrification, what really makes us uncomfortable? What are we really worried about? I'll say for myself, as someone who really loves cities, I don't want to think of myself as someone who is an opponent of change. The dynamism of cities is something that we really value about urban areas. And I landed on two leading factors. So the first, of course, is displacement, and that really goes back to the original 1964 definition. And that's important to me because that's a negative impact on people, which I think is what we really care about when people have to leave a neighborhood that they love and that they call home, not from their choice. And the second to me is homogenization. So the loss of a distinct neighborhood character, and this can be, an enclave or a landing pad for newcomers to an area that has a really interesting and distinct culture that sort of dilutes and becomes more generic, and that evolution into a kind of sameness that I think we all recognize as part of a gentrified neighborhood that can have some positive aspects to it, but also, not necessarily, we wouldn't want all of our cities to look all like that. So I'll end just by saying that I think, like many of you, I'm still in the process of figuring out what this means. Really welcome discussion. I'm hoping that this can be an interesting conversation. And for now, I will turn it over to Barbara Fryer, who is going to speak to efforts to counter gentrification in Cornelius, Oregon. Okay, I think yours should.
Hello, sorry, that's pretty loud. My name is Barbara Fryer, as Becca noted, and I plan in a small town in Oregon that's part of the Portland metropolitan region. If you look at the map above, the big gray area is Portland, and then if you look far to the west, where the arrow is, my little community, Cornelius, is located there. So it's the little gray area. We're only about 2.4 square miles, and the green area is all the rural area around the Portland metro region that's been protected as farmland for the next 50 years or so. So limited growth opportunity within that boundary that's identified in blue. As such, Metro adopted a 2040 growth concept back in the early to mid-90s, and each city within that Portland metro region had different designations to comply with. Ours, we had a town center, and that's where we need to focus most of our growth. Also, recently, the state adopted climate-friendly and equitable communities regulations, which also ask that we focus our growth in the same area. So what does Cornelius look like? So the mustard-colored outline is the city of Cornelius. The blue outlined areas are our urban growth boundary where we can grow into that are outside of our current city limits. The kind of orangish, reddish line that traverses through the center of the city is what's called Tualatin Valley Highway, and it links us to our cities to the east and west, and it also has our only bus line. So that's bus 57 on the TriMet line. To the north, you'll see a green ribbon, and that's the Council Creek, and then to the south is the Tualatin River. And again, we're pretty much surrounded north and south by areas that are outside of expected growth. The city has seen about 25% population growth in the last 5 years. The area that you can see that is being subdivided into subdivisions, that's almost completely built out now. There's only about 5 homes left. And then 54% of the people in the city identify as Latino or Hispanic. And we have the second highest Latino population in the state and the highest in overall proportion to city population. We also have the largest Spanish-speaking community in the state. Along with that, we have some disparate statistics. So 72% of our residents own a home. The state, it's only 64%. And you'd think that wouldn't be possible because our per capita income is one of the lowest, and it's at $42,598. And the state is about 66. And the reason that works is because the majority of our community has multi-generational families, and people band together, buy a home. The next group of people band together, buy a home, and before you know it, everybody has a home. One of the biggest issues in the city is that growth that we're expected to have in our town center, and the fact that our city council was very concerned about losing business, our small business network, and our naturally occurring older stock of affordable housing, not regulated affordable housing, just regular affordable housing, to redevelopment and gentrification. The next activity that we are very happy to report is that the Tualatin Valley Highway Transit and Safety Project entered project development just on October 10th this year. So it includes bus rapid transit expected on the entire corridor that you see in green on this map, and it includes from the far west, Forest Grove, my city, Cornelius, Hillsborough, and Beaverton, and it'll connect all those communities on that bus 57 route. We expect to have much better consistent service. The majority of our residents commute to work, and they commute at least 20 to 28 minutes every day. Some statistics about the route are that TV Highway has had almost 2,000 crashes since 2017, 21 fatalities in that time period, and just in the last year we had 2 in the city of Cornelius on TV Highway. So this is not just a transit project, it's a safety project to try to improve the lives of the residents in this area and along the entire corridor. A third of the corridor population lives at 300% of the federal poverty level, and about half of the corridor includes people of color. In addition, there are about 24,000 to 35,000 vehicles that travel on TV Highway every day, and it winds its way in and out of each of these communities through many downtowns. And there are $4 million in goods that travel through this region on this route. And then most significantly, I think, is that Bus 57 had over 5,000 weekday boardings, more than any other route in the TriMet service area. So many of these people use this to travel to and from work. The city's town center is in its downtown. The blue area is that Route 57, the weird, what I like to look at it as is a tuning fork. The dashed kind of bubble line is the town center boundary. On the north end, we're working on converting a rail line into a trail called the Council Creek Trail. And it extends from where the Hillsborough TriMet Max station ends into Forest Grove. The intent is that over time, probably 50 years from now, that extension could be built with the trail of the light rail line. A lot of redevelopment has to happen first. So our town center has 3 different zones. The kind of pink area to the north is mostly residential. And when the town center plan was adopted, it was intended that these would be 3- and 4-story buildings. The kind of purplish color is mixed use, and it was intended to be 4- and 5-story buildings. And then the green area was intended to be, to allow the auto-oriented uses that are there today to continue, but no new auto-oriented uses. The city's primary grade school is also located on that site, on the green on the north side of the street of Adair. And then the city's public facilities buildings are also there as well. So our process was to identify what our planning priorities were for the community. We engaged the community. We looked at existing conditions in this area, reviewed the literature, evaluated the program, and came up with some implementation strategies. As part of that, the engagement involved hiring Unite Oregon, which is a community-based organization that helped us go out into the community and meet with individual partners and individual residents and businesses to get their feedback on what was important to stave off gentrification and displacement in the city. This is a graphic of how we evaluated the various items, strategies. The planning priorities were the first option. We looked at costs and financial sustainability. We looked at the administrative capacity. My department includes me and a senior planner, so we're very tiny, and we do all of the planning for the city, including current planning. So capacity was really important to us. Feasibility involves what are some potential political, legal, or time challenges to implement the different strategies? And lastly, what is the impact of the strategy? And we came up with some top findings. And this next one is about the top commercial strategies. Having a commercial facade and infrastructure improvement program, and a culturally relevant small business technical assistance program. Those 2 items are currently underway. That's why we have a check mark. The Small Business Resource Center is located in our library that's centrally located. We're also talking, in terms of the small business legal assistance, we're talking with one of our law schools to see if we can't get a legal student to come 1 day a month and have appointments for our small businesses. We're also working on identifying key elements that would be common to community benefits or developer agreements for development in the downtown area. And then we're actively working on trying to figure out how to do a community investment trust. With regard to residential strategies, we looked at trying to create a resource hub for renters. And I think we're close on that one. At least a digital resource hub. We might locate a physical body with the Small Business Center if we can find the funding. Midterm, we're looking at trying to develop some tenant screening protections and housing preservation programs. And then long-term, we have 5 manufactured home parks in the city, and we want to make sure that those parks and the residents can stay as long as they want to stay. So we're looking at options for community ownership of those parks. So it was well received. We have an Economic Development Commission, and they identified tasks already in progress and some partnership opportunities. The Planning Commission recommended looking at our 3 town center zones, which we're going to be doing over the next year, to really reassess how can we do increased density and preservation at the same time. It's going to be difficult, but we're going to try. And then lastly, the City Council, we finally have enough money in our urban renewal district. So the City Council purchased 2 properties, the 2 that are shown on this slide. The top one is Grande Foods. It's an old grocery store that hasn't been a grocery store for probably 20 years. And there are a number of small businesses in that store. And part of it, because it was a grocery store, is being used for quinceañeras as an event space. The bottom graphic or photo is of our derelict gas station that's been vacant for almost 40 years. And we constantly are trying to get whoever owns the property to paint the graffiti off. And as you can see, we've got these great colors, and it's because our police department worked with paint manufacturers to get free paint. So both of those 2 sites are key sites in the city. Both of them are in the town center. One is at a corner of the town center that would be an entryway into the town center, the gas station is. The other one is in that couplet between Adair and Baseline, and is really a key property. Our city council approved purchasing both properties, and so we are going to move forward. The gas station should be cleaned up in November, and then we have another 6-month period of monitoring before we can market it. And then the property, the Grande Foods property, we're trying to explore the CIT opportunities, the Community Investment Trust, so that when we redevelop that site, we'll have a place that we can keep those small businesses that are currently in the Grande Foods property. So some of the issues that we encountered are participation fatigue. We have a lot of planning things going on in the state of Oregon, in the Portland metro region, in the county, and in our state, or in our city. And there's just a lot going on. A lot of our residents have multiple jobs, and then we have 3.5 people per household, and many of those households are multi-generational, so that's the average. And because the majority of our population is Latino or Hispanic, we have had a difficult time getting residents and business owners to come out to events because we have a thing called ICE bugging our residents. In fact, one of our counselors carries her passport with her because she never knows when she's going to be taken. And then our children in our schools, they're required to have a card in their backpacks for when or if their parents are taken, who they can be released to. So that's the fear climate that my community is in right now. And that's a huge barrier to participation. And on that sad note, I will turn it over, to Courtney.
Hello, everyone. I'm Courtney Banker, and Barbara, I'm filling in for 2 colleagues from the city of Austin. So I'm really honored to be here with y'all today, but I will say it was a bit unexpected, but still delighted nonetheless. And so I hail from the city of Austin in Texas. Do I have any fellow Texas people here today? Okay. Most of them are my colleagues, so thank you very much. And I have paid them to laugh and clap, so thank you. But we in Austin, in 2020, transit advocates had a huge win in Austin. If you haven't heard of it, for the first time, Austin finally was able to pass a comprehensive transit package for the community that would include first ever light rail in the city, expanded commuter rail, and significant Metro Rapid bus routes. This created a tri-party agreement between the City of Austin, our transit agency, and a new third entity called the Austin Transit Partnership. And I think what's really important about Project Connect, if you haven't heard of it, is that the community said, we've seen this done in other places, and we know that transit can bring a lot of good, but for whom? And the advocate community was complemented by a strong group of community members that said, we will not have successful transit if it means that our most vulnerable residents, our most transit-dependent users, our typical riders, can no longer afford to live in our city. And I'm really proud to work in a city that was able to pass $300 million of anti-displacement funding along with a $7 billion transit package. And so this $300 million investment was envisioned to be spent over a 13-year program and was intended to cover real estate acquisition of land, acquisition of affordable housing, and development of affordable housing, and other anti-displacement strategies. So an anti-displacement community acquisition program in which we'd provide funding to different community groups to purchase properties and preserve affordable housing, as well as community-initiated solutions that community members were able to say, this is what we think anti-displacement strategies should include, and please help us use some of that funding to further anti-displacement efforts so that we can create an Austin where everyone can ride transit and live next to transit if possible. And the reason why this was so important is that Austin changed a lot in the last 10, 20 years. I've only lived in Austin for 5 years, so a lot of this I'm hearing, from my community members, from my colleagues, but you could tell significantly that Austin's people had been displaced, especially our residents who are Black, African American. Significant population was no longer in Austin. Our places had been incredibly transformed, where the neighborhood, older housing stock was completely upgraded and the commercial spaces completely transformed. And that resulted in places not feeling like home anymore. And the community, we knew this, but we had also quantified the impact of displacement. The city engaged researchers at UT Austin. Okay. The city engaged researchers at UT Austin to study the impacts of displacement over time and to help us really identify which communities are most vulnerable to displacement. And from this study, which is called the Uprooted Report, they identified 5 key demographic indicators of vulnerability to displacement. The first being communities of color, as well as folks making less than 80% of median family income, folks without a bachelor's degree, renters, and households with children in poverty. And this study was done, if I didn't say, was done in 2019, I believe, so prior to the passage of the Project Connect transit package. And this study combined data about housing stock in communities, so the rate of appreciation of home prices, the number of sales of home prices, rents in these communities, and created an index for each neighborhood in Austin to quantify its displacement risk. And the study identified 3 displacement risk areas, the first of which is called vulnerable. And these include vulnerable residents based on those 5 demographic indicators. And these are areas that have not experienced significant demographic change yet. They can be near or can even contain areas of high property values and or high appreciation rates. Then they also identified active displacement risk areas. And these are neighborhoods in which vulnerable residents do live, but we've already been able to see significant demographic change within the last recent time period, as well as the housing market is accelerating and appreciating. And then finally, we had chronic displacement risk areas. And these are areas in which vulnerable residents had already been displaced significantly with substantial demographic changes reflected in public data, and the housing market is now already highly valued and highly appreciated. And so the study back in 2019 identified these 3 displacement risk areas, and over time, our housing department introduced a 4th category, and that was to recognize that there are areas that are past chronic, that are fully gentrified, so to speak, with the vulnerable residents are really no longer able to be identified there based on our census data. And this information is super important because we're updating this data as we get new census data, and the demographic risk areas are changing constantly in Austin. And you can see kind of the story of displacement risk evolving in Austin. So with the $300 million, the community said, look, we've done this study, we've quantified the impacts of displacement pressures in Austin. We know that this is a huge problem, and we want to make sure that with our transit investments, we are not exacerbating, and if we can, help to kind of correct some of these most glaring problems in our community. And so the questions around how do we spend the $300 million for anti-displacement funding? Like, who should benefit from that? Where should that money be spent? And what interventions should be implemented with this funding was very much driven by the community. So following the passage of Project Connect and the anti-displacement funding, a community advisory committee was established, comprised primarily of folks that this effort was trying to serve. So transit riders in these vulnerable displacement risk areas, and who themselves kind of match or align with the key indicators that we shared here. And some of their priorities identified, if you can see it on this graphic, include, foremost, minimizing immediate displacement with our transit effort. A big piece was purchasing land for community-led projects, as well as affordable housing, supporting BIPOC-owned businesses, strengthening tenants and homeowner rights, as well as preserving and helping to support cultural anchors. And this $300 million, I think, on so many levels is just really unique in the United States as a component of a transit investment. But a big piece of this is how community-centric it has been. So first was co-created with the community, this $300 million, and the community has very much guided this process. The spending plan, I think we're in year 5 or so. How high did that octave go? Yeah, so, and a lot of community members that are guiding this work are paid for their expertise, a fundamental component of good community engagement, good community work. And we're also, through this community advisory committee, constantly using them to guide some of the priority spending plans. And in fact, the community advisory committee is the group that reviews applications for the community-initiated solutions, anti-displacement efforts, and then decides how that money is allocated and which programs get awarded. And then every 3 years, we go back to the community to check in and make sure that our funding priorities still align with what they're desiring this funding to be spent towards. And so ideally, an anti-displacement strategy would be holistic, and any anti-displacement strategy must be intentional. So on the holistic side, ideally an anti-displacement strategy would think about housing and the services that complement housing, so not just housing itself. They would think about small businesses, childcare, healthcare, economic mobility, educational opportunities. And a lot of what the city of Austin has been able to do with this $300 million in our, what my colleagues do in the displacement prevention program, or displacement prevention division, checks a lot of that holistic boxes, but we're not able to do it all. We haven't really been able to accomplish our small business components of our anti-displacement goals or the childcare. We fund a Children in Schools program, but not so much a childcare program. However, our anti-displacement efforts are very much intentional. They're community-centric. They're informed by data that is constantly updated and reevaluated. It's infused with a desire to be equitable, to think about differences at the neighborhood level and to adjust our strategies to the neighborhood level, to be responsive to timing and to be intentional around timing, as well as holistic. So I actually work in our real estate division of the housing department, and so I wanted to share some of what we've been doing with our portion of the $300 million of anti-displacement funding and some key takeaways on the real estate side. Do I have anyone in the room that works on real estate? Okay, I got one hand. Okay, a few hands. Anyone that's like real estate curious? Okay, okay. All right, well, I hope I can share some things that are helpful to the work that you do. So our real estate programs, we have a number of efforts that integrate with, or that further work to advance our anti-displacement efforts around Project Connect. The first of which I alluded to earlier is basically a grant program for nonprofits to go out and purchase properties around the Project Connect system. The second of which is a much larger gap financing program that our department runs primarily for LIHTC developments, but we also award general rental and affordable rental and ownership affordable housing with a low interest kind of soft financing program. And we have a number of different sources that are able to be used for that loan program, but every year that loan program does get some Project Connect funding, and so all of the developments that go through that get that Project Connect funding have to align with the displacement risk category and be within a mile of Project Connect. And finally, the work that my team specifically does is actual acquisitions and public-private partnerships for affordable housing. And I will say, because I'm certain I'm gonna do it, we operate actually under a nonprofit affiliate of the City of Austin called the Austin Housing Finance Corporation, or AHFC, and I will do my best not to say that acronym, but I might, so stick with me here. And the reason why folks partner with us, at least in Texas, the main benefit for entering into a public-private partnership with our type of housing finance corporation is a property tax exemption. And this is a huge deal because in affordable housing, it can help reduce the overall kind of funding sources needed to make a development work. In return, our agency expects some economic benefits, but we also get deeper affordability, long-term affordability, and we get control over our assets, or so we think. We do a number of types of developments. We have a portfolio that includes rental communities, both a senior community that's shown in the upper images on the screen. We also do permanent supportive housing, and we're doing some larger scale ownership developments through our community land trust. And we're constantly, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, expanding. We're going out and purchasing land on the open market or from our fellow city departments that surprisingly don't need their land anymore. And then we're soliciting developer partners. We're also purchasing operating multifamily properties that either are naturally occurring affordable housing, as Barbara mentioned, or that are income restricted and potentially at risk of losing that income restriction. And we take a lot of unsolicited proposals from developers to partner with them and provide them a property tax exemption. And I will say the $300 million of anti-displacement funding is very unique for cities in the United States. But Austin also has been very fortunate to have gotten significant amounts of affordable housing specific bond allotments starting in 2018. So our team had been able to spend over $121 million to acquire 224 acres for the purpose of affordable housing. Some of that is vacant land, but some of that is also operating properties. And we're doing things like building 100 units of permanent supportive housing on that land. And with all that significant funding, we've been able to create a portfolio across the city. And I wanted to talk about some of our acquisition strategies to kind of lead into like some of the lessons learned here on our acquisitions. So we're typically, when we're looking for properties, be it vacant land or be it operating properties, we're trying to co-locate around community amenities, around schools, parks, grocery stores, libraries, transit. We're also looking for some geographic components for our acquisition, so we're trying to purchase properties throughout the city. The boundary of Austin's not on here, but we tend to struggle to be able to go out west in the city. It's a higher income area, a lot more NIMBYism, and so we're doing a better job of that, but still have a ways to go there. And then also when we're overlapping or using certain funding sources, we are very much tied to, and for example, on Project Connect, anti-displacement funding, we must be within a displacement risk area within a mile of Project Connect's infrastructure. And then we're also looking at being able to preserve or create more affordability. And so we've done all of our land acquisitions with cash. Thank you, voters of Austin, for approving general obligation bonds. We've also purchased a number of operating properties with cash. And we've purchased properties and portfolios of smaller multifamily developments in partnership with a local nonprofit impact investing fund. And we have certainly learned a lot. So here on this map, I'm showing Austin's the displacement risk areas that are kind of in that yellow, pink, and purple, as well as the light rail line as it stands now. So I think a few takeaways and a few points that I really want to emphasize on this map is how much things in this universe change. When voters first approved the transit package back in 2020, this was, if y'all were reading the news, before Austin's market got quite as hot as it eventually got. And a few years later, the transit cost for the light rail that voters approved was expected to be $10 billion. So we started making a lot of land acquisitions, and then actually they had to pare back what the initial light rail investment would be. And so we made some acquisitions that are maybe not on the map. Our AHFC portfolio is shown in that blue, as well as some City of Austin properties shown in a dark blue. So we made some acquisitions thinking that we'd be able to have light rail serving our property pretty soon, and now it seems like that's going to be a much longer horizon. We also, I mentioned that the City of Austin has some properties on this map. They were able to, yes, we are the City of Austin, but we also, I pretty much think of myself as an employee of the Austin Housing Finance Corporation, and the city wanted to make a very key acquisition and was able to utilize, or tell us, that they were going to utilize our land acquisition funds for anti-displacement efforts. And that is the blue kind of blob next to a green, the dark blue blob next to the light blue blob. Does this have a pointer? No. No, it does not have a pointer. Okay, so use your imagination. Does everyone see it? Kind of on that. Yes, nods. Okay, and this is huge actually, because this is one of the last remaining undeveloped tracts in Austin, in the kind of core of Austin, and it's over 100 acres of vacant land that we are now kind of in the initial planning phases for development, but it will be next to one light rail stop of the priority light rail network, and we actually had purchased a key piece of that property a few years ago from our fellow city department, and then the city realized, we could do more if we, as a city, controlled more land and could make some significant, have some more control over what development in this area of town looks like. Because you can tell, if you can, is it hard to see? The rail that goes through that part of the southeast Austin, has a significant number of vulnerable residents. It's primarily renters, and I think having this control over this amount of land in Austin will be instrumental in working towards our anti-displacement goals. So I wanted to share some lessons learned from our real estate activities, and I've highlighted this a number of times, but I cannot underline enough how much things in this world constantly seem to change, especially in real estate. So we've had a market in Austin that got super hot, and now it's not necessarily cold, but wow, that water is tepid. And so we made a number of our acquisitions, especially the properties that we did not buy in cash, but the ones that we bought in partnership with that Mpact fund. And we actually got a couple of short-term loans thinking that interest rates, surely they wouldn't go up too soon, and surely rents couldn't go down too soon. And now we have a number of properties where we're coming up with a balloon payment that we don't really know how to pay off. We also have rents that are continuing to decrease, and vacancies in Austin are getting to be quite high. Competition's really high, so we're struggling with how to operate an affordable housing portfolio well when we don't have as much revenue to bring in, and we're limited really in our ability to get additional capital to operate our properties. There have been a number of political impacts on our portfolio. So the first being that our light rail network has changed already from what we initially thought it would be in some of the kind of initial acquisitions that we were making. The second is, I mentioned that the reason why folks partner with us is because we provide a property tax exemption. Well, the Texas legislature this past session said, no. We are going to make that much more difficult. And so we have a number of properties where we are actually potentially at risk of losing our property tax exemption. And it's very hard to get someone to give you a mortgage if they're not sure if that cost is actually something, if the property taxes are actually something that won't need to be paid. And then because Austin's market it got so hot and then has now gone a little tepid, the city of Austin overall is in a much more austere environment. I mentioned that we got affordable housing bonds in 2018 and 2022. I think it was maybe $250 million, maybe $350 million, like significant bond packages. And our team had really been thinking, the sky will never fall. We'll continue to get these bond packages, surely. But now the city is itself struggling to even get a budget to work without having a tax election just simply for the budget, much less a tax election for additional bonds. And so I think this really plays into some of the long-term plans for our properties in which we thought we made my predecessors. It's always nice to be able to blame it on someone else, but I do take ownership for it, I promise. But we made a number of acquisitions, especially of our older, naturally occurring affordable housing, thinking that we would be able to redevelop it and align it with the transit investment, because of course the rail was going to go that far north, and we would have the gap financing, the affordable housing GO bonds in order to be able to fill in gaps in the LIHTC space. However, that has become increasingly tenuous. So I'll share two examples of these older properties, I think both maybe built in the 1960s to 1970s, that are two smaller infill sites, both of which the Villa del Rey is immediately next to the northern terminus of the current priority section of the light rail, and Midtown Flats is is near our operating commuter rail station, which will also be home to future light rail. And when we purchased these properties, the plan was that we would be redeveloping these soon because they're older buildings. They have a lot of capital repair needs. And we've been doing a portfolio-wide analysis of our development strategies and have identified how much funding it would take for us to be able to deploy and redevelop all these as affordable housing, as that is our core mission and aligns with our anti-displacement efforts, particularly serving families or households at or below 50% median family income. And even when utilizing 9% low-income housing tax credits, which if you could possibly get them, which it's very hard to actually get those in Austin, we're still looking at needing to add significant resources to make redevelopment possible. Between $3 million in a more generous development scenario to even as much as $9 million. And one of the things I didn't mention as market challenges in Austin is that we've actually had LIHTC investors say, we're not investing in Austin anymore. You can't even get an investor on a number of projects because Austin's market has gone so soft. Of course, things are dynamic, they'll continue to change, but the amount of time that it takes us to start preparing for redevelopment of our operating properties, it's given us a lot of insights as to, is this something we can continue to do if we're not going to have the resources to be able to support redevelopment or the significant capital repairs needed on these properties. So looking forward with, as I mentioned, we're still in year whatever octave I went to, 5 of the Project Connect spending plan. We still have more tranches of funding expected, and we also have some bond dollars that we have not spent. So looking forward, our team is anticipating focusing mostly on developing properties we've already purchased. One here, 2908 South Congress, will be close to the southern terminus of the Priority Rail extension, and we're really excited about that property because we're going to have to try a lightly parked development, which itself has a number of challenges as far as accomplishing some of our anti-displacement goals and bringing in the population that used to live in Austin back. Are these folks that tend to have a car, is what we're hearing, and so trying to balance some tensions there. And then I think a key switch that we're changing to is how can we focus our acquisition efforts on buying newer properties that we could actually buy down affordability and precipitate that trickling down of the housing stock to make it more affordable. So that we're not ending up with properties where the plumbing, the pipes keep bursting in the floors and everything's flooding all the time, so that we're not faced with constant capital repair budget needs that the property itself can't maintain. So thank you very much. As I mentioned, I was supposed to be joined by my colleague Nefertitti Jackmon, but I have some colleagues here from our displacement prevention team, so welcome any questions and would like to invite them to help me answer any questions if I can't myself. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much to both of you. Really great presentations, and I'm looking forward to good discussion. I'm going to suggest if everyone wants to take like a quick stretch. I feel like the hour after lunch is always a tough one, so and Cami talked about it this morning, so I'll model a little stretch. Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm going to start with one question, and then encourage people to use the central mic for follow-up questions. And I'm going to say normally the role of the moderator is to ironclad keep the audience to questions, not comments. But we actually welcome comments. So if there are folks in the room who are working on these same issues and you want to share something that you're working on, feel free. This isn't like a panelist experts and you must only ask questions. We actually genuinely want this to be a conversation. So I'm going to start with a question to both of you. I'm curious. I know you're both very early days or kind of in the middle of your strategies, but I'm interested in how you're measuring success or what success will look like. Like, how will you know if your programs are working as you wanted them to?
Okay, can you hear me? So for Cornelius, our success will look like we will have that fabric of small businesses that we have today, or even more small businesses in our downtown. We will, in a way that the small businesses can afford to continue to function in those areas. The housing that we have today, I would really like to make sure that people have a choice in whether they sell to a developer or they stay in their property. One of the things I'm doing is I'm going to have a workshop with lenders, developers, and contractors, architects, to really have them look at some of these properties and what people can do on their property in terms of middle housing and accessory dwelling units to stave off that sell-off to other types of development. And that way we can get some density and generational wealth within the community.
Can y'all hear me? Oh, okay. I think that's such a good question, because as y'all could glean, I focus on real estate, and so I think the lens in which I think about success is probably very specific to, like, okay, well, you know, our next LIHTC development, maybe we can get our per unit gap like below X amount for 50% MFI and below. But I think big picture, you know, this whole effort is really around making sure that when we have light rail operational in 5 to 10 years, that Austin, maybe we can start to reverse some of the trends that we identified in the Uprooted report, and some of the trends that we've just been acknowledging in the community overall, that we can continue to bring folks back into Austin that used to have generational ties to the community. And actually, all of our solicitations that we put out to the community require developers to utilize our preference policy. And this is both a right sizing and a disability preference policy, but the third component of this policy is about generational ties. And so being able to, you know, make sure that during lease up in particular, we are filling our affordable housing developments with folks that ideally either were about to be pushed out of Austin because they couldn't afford to live there, or are able to come back to Austin.
Thank you. Good answers. Any questions from the audience? We'll alternate. Yeah, can you go up to the mic?
For those with questions, since it's a big room, do you want hands or do you want people to queue here?
I'm good with queuing.
Okay.
Yeah, so if people if people have questions, feel free to just step up to the mic. Excellent.
Okay, that wasn't my question, though. Just point of order. My question stems from Austin's presentation, pardon me. And that's because for all the acronyms in this industry, I hadn't heard of NOAA before, this naturally occurring affordable housing, record scratch. I'm from Portland. And I just didn't know how that, like, my mind was guessing that's gotta be the places right near highways or something, because that's what I see in this town. And I'm just wondering if, being someone who didn't just learn about the environmental impacts of transportation-related air pollution, like how these community-driven organizations are like really informed of any environmental conditions that might be behind a veneer of like naturally affordable housing. And if it's totally not that, I'd love to learn more about it. But I just bought a house for the first time myself, and there were so many tempting affordable options that were right next to I-5, and only my graduate level education informed me about the trade-offs.
Yeah, that's great question. And actually, my colleagues in the displacement prevention division, we're constantly vetting new acquisition opportunities and partnership requests. And a lot of those are to purchase properties that are naturally occurring affordable housing. And for one of the recent acquisitions, the team, your colleagues, prepared a kind of a displacement or a NOAA analysis. And for me, it was the first time I saw data about where these NOAAs are across the city, and they're in every council district. They're found in every part of our city, which was really shocking. And I think that, yes, you might find properties near a highway, but in Austin, you can find naturally occurring affordable housing really all over. And I mean, it tends to be older housing stock, and, depending on how your city grew or where you live grew, I mean, sometimes that might be around the highway, but in Austin, perhaps because of how our city is laid out, it's not just around a highway. I think for our acquisitions, we tend to shy away from wanting to purchase properties right along the highway for those specific reasons. And we've been very intentional about that and wanting to make sure that we're not, just positioning affordable housing around more environmental concerns.
I wanted to add one other comment to that, which is one of the things that I've seen in looking at this question of transportation improvements connected to gentrification is you sometimes get this phenomena. I've not seen it with highways specifically, but more maybe with arterials that are undergoing safety upgrades or like turning a 6-lane road into something that's more multimodal or is re-landscaped, that you sometimes can get community opposition that's like, no, this is going to gentrify our neighborhood. And so you get this really difficult dilemma between an improvement that I think with our transportation brains on, we're all like, no, this is obviously a good thing. You're seeing fatalities, this is a really unpleasant pedestrian environment. And then the perception of it is like, oh no, the city is coming in to put in a bike lane, and that means that they're trying to displace, people like us. Let's say, and I feel like that's one of those questions. Like that's why I became so interested in this as a wicked problem, where it really is these really tough competing priorities between how do you listen to local communities, how do you apply your expertise, and how do you kind of figure out like what good looks like. So I think it's a really good question without an easy answer. Go ahead.
Hi there, Jennifer Ash. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the real estate lead for King County Metro up in Seattle. I actually had a question for each of you, if you don't mind. So for Barbara, on one of your checkmarked commercial activities or solutions that you had underway, it was something along the lines of a small business, like technical advice. I'd like to hear what that is, maybe a little more about that. And for Courtney, my question for you was, do any of your mitigation strategies look at construction impacts and specifically like avoiding the dislocation of small businesses? That's something that in our group, we're constantly facing questions from the jurisdictions that we work in about how our construction is going to impact communities, in particular when we do projects that are prioritized for equity reasons. You're working in areas with historically underserved people, so you're mostly impacting historically underserved people. It's kind of a catch-22, and we're always looking for solutions for that. Thank you.
So for Cornelius, we had a space in our library that was built 5 years ago now, that the main floor is the library, and then we have 2 floors of senior housing above, senior affordable housing. And we had a space in the library that was not successful as a coffee shop or as a for sale item. The idea was that you could come in, get your coffee, and then go to the library. And it wasn't successful, so we were trying to think about what we could do in that space that would help the community. And we partnered with our local chamber of Commerce, and we developed a program for small businesses. So they can come in and get resources on everything you can think of about how to conduct a business, how to accept the legal issues. So that's why we want to add the legal opportunity. It also connects contractors with a local company that purchases the big software for estimating, and then you buy in as a community-owned partner, and you can use that software, and it's minimal participation in terms of cost. So there's a lot of ways that this incubator, it's not even an incubator, it's a space that people can come and get those resources. We also have workshops, quarterly workshops, where we bring in experts, we bring in people who are in the different industries that we have in the city to talk about how they were successful, so that we can try to get more people to come in and try different things as entrepreneurs. Lastly, the major funding for this was the last of our ARPA dollars, our American Recovery Act dollars. And so we are concerned about how are we going to make it sustainable after that pot of money is gone. We have another year left. It has to be spent by December of '26. So we're looking for that resource. And then lastly, the person that we hired to work in that position is bilingual, since the majority of our residents are Spanish speakers, or some are Spanish speakers. And that really takes some of the barriers away from people coming in to ask for help.
So I'm curious, was your question around, I'll answer your question in like one way, but I don't know if you have other aspects of this that you were wondering about. Typically our properties are vacant land, so there's no current, we do our best not to displace current operating businesses. However, some of our developments, one that's hopefully going to be opening in a couple months, will include significant, the whole proposal from the developer, the development team, when we initially solicited proposals, was centered around specifically Black businesses. And so they've got a number of creative spaces that will be programmed by local small businesses, including an art studio, there'll be a cafe, and there will be a number of live-work residences in this 200-plus unit multifamily property. And so I think as we look at some more development opportunities, there's always a balance for us of like adding complexity and adding things that make it more difficult for us to go find more funding opportunities. But I think there's always a benefit of, when it makes sense to think about how can we make sure that this affordable housing development thinks of housing, and I'm actually, borrowing terms here from my colleagues in the displacement prevention division, but creating housing as an part of the ecosystem of the neighborhood, right? Like it's not just housing that makes affordable housing that makes a difference in someone's lives, but it's also like where they're living and what they have access to. And so we've been talking with being able to partner with the library, for example, and do some affordable housing developments with the library or with our public health colleagues, and that big blob that I was not very articulately geographically locating for y'all, we're very much imagining that will include local serving businesses. That part of Austin has not had a bank ever, and so we're looking to be able to make sure that we can bring in a community-focused financial institution. So like a spectrum of businesses.
Hi, I I'm Kaylee Silver from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and here with the Pottstown delegation. Question is for Austin. You mentioned that the acquisitions are primarily not done by the City of Austin itself, but instead the Austin Housing Finance Corporation. Can you talk a little bit more? Is it a CDC? What's the governance structure? How the formation of this Housing Finance Corporation came about? I have one other kind of back-end question on that too. And then also with the acquisitions, how do you structure it around the structure of a land bank or not? Thank you.
Yeah, so the Austin Housing Finance Corporation in the state of Texas, we have, it's allowed under state statute to create a housing finance corporation. And our housing finance corporation is basically the board is city council, and it's staffed entirely by staff of the city. And so there are maybe 3 other type agencies that operate within our county. So the county has a housing finance corporation, the housing authority, and the housing authority of the county also have like their equivalent of a housing finance corporation. But basically it's allowed by state statute. This is the entity that can issue bonds, tax exempt bonds for LIHTC developments. And you're also authorized to own and operate income restricted housing, should you so please. So our agency has been around. It was founded in 1979, did one of the first LIHTC developments in Austin, but we really kind of had a smaller growth pattern up until the last 5 to 10 years when we really started thinking about being able to do more partnerships based on the need for affordable housing in the community. I could do a whole other panel on how the developers feel about us now, but yeah. Did you have a second question? Did I get it?
Is there any interaction? Do you ever work with structured land banks?
Oh, okay. So I mentioned that we do some ownership developments, and we put those through our community land trust, which is, we call the Austin Community Land Trust, but it's not actually operated under the Community Land Trust statute in Texas. It's operated under the same Austin Housing Finance Corporation. So all of our real estate activities where we are owning property for affordable housing for the city of Austin is through the Austin Housing Finance Corporation. So it's not it's not like a land bank in, I think how I understand they might operate in other cities. And we're not, taking, there isn't a lot of like tax delinquency in Austin where we're being able to get properties that are foreclosed. Like we're going out to the open market and paying also controversial, like top dollar fair market value for these properties. Unless we can get them from a fellow city department that has surplus land, then we're getting them for a deal.
I'm going to jump in with another question, but if anyone in the audience feels so moved, feel free to move over. Why don't you go ahead? You're standing right there. Go ahead.
Hey, Ricardo Perez, I use him and his pronouns. I am a coalition organizer based in Minneapolis, and I help lead an anti-displacement effort across a corridor of a light train extension project. You can check us out at bluelinecoalition.org. I guess my question, I'm very interested in the social infrastructure that you're pointing at in the form of the Community Advisory Board. What are they advising on? What jurisdiction do they have? How much do they get compensated? In Minneapolis, we believe that community-led is innovative, but that also presents challenges as it pertains to time, conflict of interest, and other situations. But I do strongly believe that that's been a big factor in changing the outcomes that we know occur when you build a train through our community. So I'm just curious if you can talk about what groups are arising, just tell us more about the people side of it, So anyways, thank you.
So the real estate team in the housing department is really kind of given the directives from the Community Advisory Committee, and we're I would say that my colleagues in the displacement prevention team have a lot more direct contact with the Community Advisory Committee. So to be honest, I'm not super familiar with some of the nitty-gritty in which you're asking about, but I think it's been fundamental to hopefully what will be the positive impacts of this $300 million of anti-displacement funding. The fact that this Community Advisory Committee I don't know how long folks serve on that committee, but, it's intended to be folks that are very much, they can speak to the issues in Austin, and they represent the communities in which we are most trying to serve with this anti-displacement funding. And so the goal here is that, this is the body that, my understanding is that they're actually reviewing the applications for community-initiated solutions and deciding which organizations in the community should get certain funding. So, they've been able to fund through the Community-Initiated Solutions program. For example, I think one thing that I found really interesting was like estate planning efforts. So thinking, for folks that currently own property, maybe they're more property rich than they have other assets, and wanting to make sure that properties can stay in the family, like really thinking through some of the inheritance impacts and tenancy in common rules, like some of these implications of being able to inherit property and making sure that it's going to stay with the family rather than kind of becoming a inheritance dispute. So some really interesting components there. But, yeah.
For the city of Cornelius, we don't have an advisory committee. We've had a very difficult time getting our residents to come out and participate. So instead of doing that, we hired Unite Oregon, who goes out into the community and solicits feedback and concepts and issues, and we react to that and then go back out and ask them, is this right? Is this what we heard? And then is this a valid solution for this issue? And then we get that feedback back. So, and Unite Oregon is a community-based organization that does this type of work. They started on the Southwest Corridor Light Rail project doing equitable community development.
Thanks. So what I was curious about was the thinking about cities or towns as situated in larger regions where ultimately, we care about people having affordable homes, and we care about strong communities and neighborhoods. How are you guys each thinking in very different contexts, from a smaller city to a larger one, of your efforts in the context of your larger regions and the towns and cities around your specific places?
So Cornelius is at the edge of the urban growth boundary, and we have a lot of pressure from our residents wanting us to grow, and we have that solid boundary that we cannot expand for 50 years. And so we are at the point where we're having some struggle with the increase in density and the people that live there, and trying to make sure that the growth that occurs in that town center and doesn't displace as many businesses or people as it could. So we're experiencing something that much of the region experienced 20 years ago when the growth concept was originally initiated, and the tension is older in the other parts of the region than it is for us in our community.
I don't know if this is like the mindset of just, well, apparently not, but the city employees, I feel like for the city of Austin, we're only really working within our city boundaries. So I think maybe become a little myopic in that way. But as far as the big scale picture of our anti-displacement work, we've been able to demonstrate that it seems like a lot of folks are moving out of the city of Austin and into some of the neighboring areas. And I think our efforts are really to be able to bring people back to the city if they want to come, or to make sure that folks that are kind of here tenuously are able to stay. And so perhaps that pits us a little bit antagonistically from our neighbors, because like, why would you want to live in Leander when you could live in Austin? But I'm just kidding. But the goal is to make sure that folks can continue to live in the city and come back if they've already had to be pushed out.
Thanks. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. I'm gonna close with a question that's kind of half posed to the audience, so hoping that some of you who have kind of questions churning will answer, and then also certainly Courtney and Barbara, I'd love to hear what you think. But I'm interested, as we leave this room, what are some of the research questions or just the whatabouts that you wish we knew more about, or we could better measure, or we better understood? And I think some of those have come up in the questions, the question about how to support businesses through construction, where, it's again that kind of push and pull, or that tension of how do you make change without kind of destroying the thing that you're advocating for in the process. Definitely the question of community engagement and how to do that really effectively, how to make sure that you're capturing people's views, not over fatiguing and not intersecting with some of the other really challenging kind of societal things that are going on. But I'll put it out to the audience. What are other pieces of this puzzle that you wish we knew more about, or you're interested in, and certainly interested to hear what the two of you think?
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm from Portland. One of the things that I was thinking about was the idea of policies encouraging people who've been displaced to return. I know there have been developments in Portland where they tried to do like a right to return policy, and people had a really hard time proving that they'd been pushed out of the neighborhood for various reasons. Other people said, the stuff that I liked about that neighborhood isn't there anymore, and it's in this other part of town where I live now, where my community is. So I'm kind of always interested to understand, like, how effective are those types of programs? What makes some of those programs more effective than others? And then how do they compare with things like relocation assistance, tenant protections, stricter rules around eviction? Like, is it better to kind of prevent it or to kind of try to undo it?
That's a great one, and it really speaks to the capturing the time-bound aspect of what we do. If it takes 5 years and you have a family that moved somewhere else for 5 years, well, now they've invested in a new neighborhood and they're resettled and they don't want to move again, even though that, sort of ivory tower policy intent was to do that. It's a great question. Go ahead.
So one thing, my name is Ursula. I'm from, as Courtney stated, from the city of Austin. And as this young lady mentioned and Courtney mentioned, I'm coming from more of a community lens in terms of trying to mitigate displacement, or those that are impacted by the burdens of Project Connect, to keep them well enough sustained. So the next few years that we have, we're in year 5, if my calculations are correct, and the next 8 years plus, that they can be able to sustain in those areas. And so she mentioned programs that we have. I wanted to just elaborate a little more with our community-initiated solutions. Part of that $300 million, we got a portion of that with the anti-displacement. And so with community-initiated solutions, what we did and what we think that is really, really important is to partner with community organizations that represent the community, because those are the individuals that have those lived experiences, and they can tell us this is what we need in our community to help us to sustain in the area. And so part of that, what we did do, we did a solicitation. The first 3 years, it was $20 million, and then, years 3 to 5, we have $20+ million that we funded to current organizations that were recently funded and new organizations. And so basically what we did is they came up, we asked them to be innovative, with projects that can help that effort. We had some short-term solutions and also like long-term solutions. So we had organizations that did estate planning that Courtney mentioned to help those individuals that are can possibly displace out of their homes, to help them with repairs or estate planning, to assist with generational health. We have other organizations that assist with our renters, because they're important too. They're part of the community as well, with helping them with legal assistance, right to know your right campaigns, things like that. Then we have, part of it went to like renter assistance, helping them. We had funding for them to help them with their rent, even though that's a short-term goal, but in order to get them stabilized, for them to remain in the community and stuff, so they won't move to Leander or to the Pflugerville areas. And so we just had, several, it was a multiple, maybe over 8 different innovative programs to help the individuals to maintain in their community. And that's something that we kind of focus on and value a lot.
That was great. Those were great examples. You should have been a panelist. Go ahead.
I just really wish there was some data around culture and identity. You both referenced in your presentation the loss of the je ne sais quoi that makes a place special. And sure, that goes with the displacement of people too, but if they're just how Austin identified the data set that equals vulnerable to displacement, and maybe someone has done this, and if you have, please find me, but I would love to know, like, what is that data set? How do we define the displacement of identity or culture?
That is a great question. I love that. Anything that the two of you wanted to add to that? Research questions?
Oh, that was a great one. And I feel like I had a thought earlier, but it has escaped me.
Okay. Oh, Barbara, go ahead. Okay, well, on that note, I think we're just about out of time. So I thank everyone for coming. It was a really good conversation, definitely thought-provoking, and feel like hopefully we've all ended with our brains churning a little bit and interested to get back to work. So thanks, everyone.